Hare Krishna, my obeisances. Welcome to the Bliss Podcast. Maybe this will be the third episode of the Bliss Podcast, so thank you very much for tuning in. I'm joined today by a very esteemed and special guest, His Grace Dhira Govinda Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Maitreya, rishi Prabhu. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for coming. It's an honor to have you here in our impromptu setup. So I'm very pleased to have Dhira Govinda Prabhu here today, especially because he is such a prolific writer and a very realized devotee, although he will not admit it. He's the author of a couple books here. The Effects of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra on Stress, Depression, and the Three Gunas. A very interesting book about scientific experiments that were taken on individuals of the effects of the Maha Mantra on average people, and in comparison to a mantra which is totally made up. So very interesting. You can check out this if you like. And another book, Relationships That Work, The Power of Conscious Living. So this is a transformative communication approach to self-realization, talking about relationships with a spiritual perspective. So it's very interesting. And I haven't got a chance to fully delve into these books, but I highly recommend anyone else to please go on and do it. And also, you were previously, from, if I'm not mistaken, from 1988 to 2004, the CPO director. Is that the correct title for
1998 to 2004.
98, okay.
Yeah, early in 1998, the ISKCON GBC asked me to establish what became known as the ISKCON International Central Office of Child Protection.
Okay.
So we established that in early 1998.
Okay.
And then I served as director through about mid-2004.
Okay. So obviously, how do you say, to put it lightly, the situation in the organization, which people generally call ISKCON, or what people generally identify as the main movement of the Hare Krishna movement, or the main organization for the Hare Krishna movement, the situation regarding children's welfare or child abuse is something that I want to talk about in this topic, in this podcast, because obviously it's a bit of a heavy topic, as we were discussing previously, but an important one nonetheless. But before that, just to introduce our audience to yourself, perhaps you'd be so kind just to a little bit talk about how you came to Krishna consciousness and your relationship with Srila Prabhupada and how that manifested. Is quite inspiring. We were talking about it previously, and I think everyone else would also like to hear. So if you'd be so kind.
Okay. And just for my information, when I speak, should I be looking at the interviewer or some camera?
It's totally up to you. This camera is directly facing you. This camera is facing both of us. You can switch between them to address the audience as you would please.
This was facing me. That was facing both of us. All right. Okay. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
All right. Well, I was first, more or less, introduced to Prabhupada's movement in 1980 in State College, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And a very fine Prabhu named Stambhadas Prabhu was running a Bhakti Yoga Center. It's right outside of Penn State University. And basically, my only service for 3 years was consuming massive amounts of prasadam. And along that, my heart got sufficiently purified that actually after I got my Bachelor's of Science degree, I went to one gathering and Stambhadas taught us how to chant japa.
Okay.
I'd already been reading some Prabhupada small books. And in the summer of 83, I backpacked around Europe. And that's when I started chanting japa. Interestingly, actually, I first moved into a Bhakti Yoga ashram, and it was an ISKCON center in Israel.
Okay.
In 1984, and it was outside of Tel Aviv, a suburb called Ra'anana, and And I decided to give myself full time to it because years of taking prasadam and beginning to study Prabhupada's books. In that summer of 1983, I read Bhagavad Gita as it is, cover to cover. And I had to admit, even though I wasn't like searching for God or anything, but like this philosophy makes sense, and so much more sense than anything else I've been exposed to. So I thought, well, if I were to consider myself an honest person of integrity, I owe it to myself to try the process that Prabhupada uses that term, a science of self-realization. Means science, okay? It's sure a logical philosophy and hypothesis, and then an experiment you can do with the laboratory being my own consciousness. With all right, let me give myself to it for 6 months, and in one sense, it's 40 years later, and I'm still doing the experiment because I'm very satisfied with the results. And and so there were some beginnings, and then as years went on, I got more and more realization about Srila Prabhupada as my direct current personal link to Sri Krishna's disciplic succession. And I can go into some of those aspects if we want to go there.
Sure, please do. So how long was it at the time that you elapsed your introduction to Krishna consciousness before you started to take it more seriously? When you first got in contact to that time, it must be
sure. 2.5, 3 years.
2.5, 3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. Filled with prasadam the whole time.
Yeah, prasadam. I mean, I did a numerical count in a few years ago, and I calculate I consumed more than 1,000 plates of prasadam.
Okay.
Before I chanted one round of japa.
Wow. So, okay, you're taking more than one meal a day also in order for that to be possible.
Yeah, like I would go to the Sunday feast, and then Stamba, he did a Friday program.
Okay.
And he had a Tuesday evening program on campus. It was a cooking class. But somehow I never managed to arrive on time to learn how to cook anything. But at the end of the cooking class, they would distribute the fruits of the cooking class.
Right.
And so I always managed to arrive on time for that.
Some coincidence.
Yeah. Random chance.
Okay.
And then, so like, it became something like 3 times per week, and each time, like 4 plates.
Wow.
So if you do the numbers,
okay.
it adds up.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're a great devotee of prasadam.
Yeah.
Well, can I just ask, out of interest, what was your first or favorite dish? Like, what were you, like samosas or halwa? What was it?
In some ways, like I never met prasadam I didn't like.
Okay.
I didn't make distinctions, but yeah, like it was amazing. The samosas and the chutney and the sabjis, sweet rice, and I really like the savories, and
lots of varieties.
Lots of variety.
I think.
Right. So I started taking prasadam. I think it was fall semester 19A, and a little bit after that, I started reading some of Prabhupada's small books.
Okay. Which book did you read first?
It might have been Science of Self-Realization. Maybe it was Beyond Birth and Death. Maybe Perfection of Yoga.
Right.
I read them in those years.
Okay.
Yeah. Just to give an idea of those years. So like myself and my friends who, because we were really, at least I was telling myself I was only interested in what was called the prasadam. And then, but then sometimes Stamba, he would switch up the schedule thing. So we would arrive, and then like there'd be like the Bhagavad Gita lecture in the class.
He tricked you.
Yeah, and would he look good till you get and like that's in the I did get some taste of hearing Stamba's classes and some kirtan and like that. Okay, and then in the summer of 1983, my process was there in Steakhouse, Pennsylvania, or my home city of Philadelphia. I had too much false ego built up to admit, or to speak of myself or others, that I was beginning to like take seriously this Krishna consciousness. Like, it made sense. I was attracted to the lifestyle, the guarantees. Scary. And I had too much of an image. And I was chairman of this, and I'm a leader in that, and like that. So then, when I was on my own in the summer of '83, it was actually my first time out of the United States, even outside of the East Coast of the United States. And my plan was to do what I did was I traveled. There was something called a URL pass, and I could take trains anywhere in Europe. And I was staying in youth hostels, sometimes hooking up with some others. And actually, I remember, because here we are in London. So that's significant for me. So my first day out of the United States there in maybe early June 1983, 22 years old, I had my Bachelor's of Science in Psychology. So it might have been Gatwick Airport. I think I landed at Heathrow Airport. Okay, it happened to be a Sunday. And I found myself that evening, because I had a Back to Godhead with the addresses of ISKCON centers. So I found myself that evening at Soho Street, Prasadam, the Sunday feast. Okay. All right. So then after the Sunday feast, I go to my youth hostel. Then the next day, I find myself taking a train to some place called Latour Heath.
Okay.
And to the Bhaktivedanta Manor. And then I stayed. And then that next morning, that was my first ever Mongol RT. Because till then, I'd never been to any of the places. Even though like in Pennsylvania, there's Gita Nagari. Philadelphia has a big temple. The only place I saw was Stamba's kind of preaching center in City College, Pennsylvania. So I stayed at Bhaktivedanta Manor. Maybe it was 3 days. And then, I would find myself, in Paris or Copenhagen or Amsterdam. And wherever I was, I would settle in a youth hostel. And then I found myself just kind of like walking around, chanting japa, looking for a Govinda's restaurant. And then I felt like it's my first time ever in Europe, outside the United States. There's so many things to do. And like all I was wanting to do, kind of like find prasadam and the devotee association. Mm-hmm. So I kind of was like saying like, you're really attracted to this. And that's when I started. I really never had a gradual stage about japa rounds. I went pretty much from 0 to 16.
Okay.
And like that. And then so after about 4 months around Europe, and I towards the end of those months, I landed and there was a big Hare Krishna festival in August called Janmashtami. Mm-hmm. So I was at a place called Villa Vrindavan outside of Florence, Italy. Okay. And I remember they had a festival. They had 1,108 preparations. So that's when I knew this is the spiritual path for me.
That was the convincing thing.
Yeah, there was a philosophy and all that. So this was amazing. Okay. And then at Villa Vrindavan, because like I didn't speak Italian and they couldn't engage me so well. I'm not easy to engage. I'm not very handy or things like that. So they said, you should just read. So I read Bhagavad Gita as it is cover to cover. So that was the first major book of Prabhupada. And then I took a boat to Greece, and then from Greece I took a boat to Israel. I was scheduled to participate in something called WUJS. It's an acronym for World Union of Jewish Students. Yeah. And it's for Jewish students who had a college degree. I don't think it exists anymore, but that was 1983. And I had a college degree, and the idea is then you study Hebrew, and you study Judaic studies, and then you work in your field, and their hope is you make aliyah, you become a citizen.
That's aliyah, that's the meaning.
Aliyah actually means one who elevates themselves. So for the Jewish soul to become a citizen of Israel, you've elevated yourself. Mm-hmm. Okay? So, and I wasn't like particularly into like Judaism or thing. But I wanted some adventure. So I thought, and then there was some special financial incentives, and like you can do this whole Israel thing. For me, like in a sense, it could have been Spain or Russia, but there was opportunities in Israel. Or, study. Again, I wasn't like looking for spirituality or something, but it was like an adventure after backpacking around Europe. And then so while I was at the Woodges Institute in Arad, it was in the Negev desert not far from Beersheba, not far from Dimona. I was chanting 16 rounds per day. And and I was visiting the devotees who had a center further north in the Tel Aviv, Herzliya Pituach area. And then after 6 months, the idea was to work in my field. I actually had a job scheduled at a development town called Beit Shemesh, because I did this 6 months. The first 6 months at Woodges, we learned Hebrew and some Judaic studies. But then that's when I decided, like, this Krishna consciousness is so appealing to me intellectually, emotionally, spiritually. So I thought, let me give a 6 month experiment in the ashram.
Okay. It was gnawing in the back of your mind the whole time you are traveling.
Yeah.
Okay. Prabhupada's books were taking effect.
Yes. The books with the prasadam, I was receptive. There was some purification of heart. There's so many chapters here, because after about 2 months at the ashram in Renana, I visited my family in the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania area, and I was kidnapped.
Wow.
There's a lot of chapters here, depending where we want to go with this. I was kidnapped, and they were called deprogrammers.
Okay. So this is like the same as, because in the early days of the movement, Orthodox was going on.
Yeah. So this was like, historically, I think I may have been the last Hare Krishna who was kidnapped by deprograms. Okay. I think I was the last one. It was 1984. Right, and then after me, they gave up on the Hare Krishnas, and many of them went to prison. And so that was an ordeal. After a week of being held against my will in a home in suburban Philadelphia, they sent me to Iowa for rehabilitation.
Okay.
And from Iowa, I escaped. Okay, because I had just been kind of like fooling them, tricking them, trying to stay 1 or 2 psychological steps ahead of them.
What did they put you through at? I'm just curious, like, how did they test you there? How did they try to deprogram you?
Yes. Okay. Well, unlike others who got kidnapped and subjected to the deprogramming, they were not physically violent with me.
Oh, that happened. They were physically violent?
Oh, yeah. Physically violent, sometimes trying to force meat down their throat and tie them up on a chair.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And sleep deprivation. Wow. So they didn't do that to me. At first, I remember I walked into the home and I saw my mother and father there, which already was a signal. My mother and father, they'd been divorced for like 5 years.
Okay, something fishy was there.
Yeah, not that they were so inimical, but neither were they that friendly. So they're both here. And then sort of like out of the woodwork, a few men came out. And one, I remember, the lead deprogrammer, his name was Mark. And he said, "Hello, David. We'd like to talk to you about Krishna consciousness."
Almost like preachers of Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. But, so at first I was like, oh, I like to talk about Krishna consciousness. Okay. Yeah. All right. And then there was this Mark, he was practically the only one who could like speak complete sentences. The others, for the most part, they were kind of like goons, like that. And so, like to tackle me if I tried to run away. But at the beginning, I didn't realize that I was held against my will. Okay. So we're talking about different things. I remember one topic that came up was, because I had become vegetarian. And then some of the henchmen, they became like livid, and they started talking about Jesus, maybe.
Oh, okay. Well, they're personal into it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Become even like some frothing at the mouth. Wow, it was scary. And then I could see like these people aren't really interested in rational conversation. So I said, okay, I feel complete. I think I'll leave now. And then Mark said, if you try to leave, we'll block you away. Wow. That's when I realized I was maybe 2 hours into it. Mm-hmm. And I looked at my father and my mother. My sister was also, she's like 4.5 years older than me. Mm-hmm. This body is 63 now. Mm-hmm. So
you don't look. You don't look. I wouldn't have guessed your age.
Oh, okay.
Okay, looking good. The prasadam has an effect.
Yeah, keeps the devotee lifestyle keeps one youthful.
Jai.
So my sister was there. For a while, this is like a federal crime. Mm-hmm. Okay, but then I sort of let that sink in. Mm-hmm. And then I went through the strategy. Of, okay, like, not that like I'll immediately surrender and see the light, but gradually I'll let them think, I'm resisting, but yeah, here's some good points here.
Right, you're getting convinced.
Yeah. Because if it was too sudden,
eating. Yeah.
In a sense, the most difficult part was keeping a straight face. Because they would these weren't particularly intellectual or philosophical people, and they're going up against the Bhagavatam.
Right.
The Bhagavad Gita.
Not much chance they have.
Not much chance. But then I would be like, oh yeah, I never thought it would. And then, they would do things like they'd come out with computer printouts of lists of many supposedly connected with the ISKCON, the Krishna consciousness movement, who'd been to prison for this and that. And that didn't impress me, but I made it seem like it impressed me because I think, well, we could probably do the same thing for Orthodox Jews who got in trouble with the law and would do terrible things. We can do the same thing with born-again Christians or Buddhists.
Right.
So kind of...
You were mentioning a quote from St. Augustine, was it? That you don't judge the philosophy by its abuse.
Yep, precisely. Never judge a philosophy by its abuse.
Right.
So, okay. So I was going, and then, and then of course a very difficult part because they were blasphemous to Srila Prabhupada. So that was very painful. Okay. It was very painful.
You had to hold your tongue though.
Yeah, yeah. And that was difficult. So this whole kidnapping was a blessing in disguise. Okay. I'm deeply grateful for the experience on many levels. One thing, at that time, I had, because I was taking prasad for years and reading some small books, and then I thought, okay, so once I committed myself and moved in the ashram, about a week or two after that, I started being plagued by terrible doubts. Like I would find things in Prabhupada's books, and this is a contradiction, this and that. I mean, sure, from a bird's eye view in retrospect, I can understand. So these were profoundly intellectual doubts. Basically, my mind was looking for some escape routes to go back to sense gratification.
Mm-hmm. But do you think that the deprogrammers, they triggered something in the workings of your mind that made you start looking for the doubts, or it was
okay.
No,
it was the other way. Uh-huh. When I was still in Israel at the ashram, like in those 6 weeks or so, I developed a doubting mentality.
Intentionally or not intentionally?
Not intentionally, but my mind was plaguing me. Krishna talks about slay the demon of doubt with one. Right. And I've come up with one, and through the doubts, my enthusiasm was dampened. Mm-hmm. I was tormented. And at some level, I knew these doubts have no substance, but my mind just kept grabbing onto one thing after the other.
Mm.
So then, after the deprogram, where I've escaped, there's many chapters. But after the deprogram, I thought, like, the deprogrammers, this is the best the planet has to offer to persuade one to not practice Krishna consciousness.
Professional dissuaders.
Yeah, yes, like that's what they do. Like my parents paid big money. This is the best the planet has to offer to talk you out of chanting Hare Krishna and practicing Bhakti Yoga. And I could see from a philosophical point of view, they were completely lame.
Mm.
Like they just had nothing.
Jai.
So they are my gurus to whom I'm forever indebted. That week with them, deep in my faith in Srila Prabhupada, the teachings, the philosophy, and the practice. Actually, that wasn't their intention, but they deepened my trust in the whole process. Yeah.
You learned how to find the gold even in the happy place. Okay.
Yeah. And then, well, just for viewers or whatever, like if we all right, so my parents, because I knew they were good people who cared about me, but they had been persuaded by certain persons and groups, and they became so inimical that they kidnapped me. But just fast forward a little more than a quarter century later, from 1984 when I was kidnapped. In 2010, my mother left her body, and I was there with her, and she was gladly and sweetly receiving me chanting Hare Krishna and Srila Prabhupada playing Hare Krishna, and my mother and my sister also completely supported that.
What happened? I mean, what facilitated such a change? Well, it's quite drastic.
Yes, it was quite drastic. Well, also we got, and just 2 years later in 2012, my father left his body, and I was there with my daughter, as she was 21 at the time. My daughter was, my daughter's now 33, and my son's 50. And my father, my Sita, that's my daughter, and I, we were intensely chanting Hare Krishna when my father left his body.
Wow.
As very nice. As it is said in Srimad Bhagavatam, Janmalabha Prapumsa Ante Narayana Smiti, the perfection of human life is to be absorbed in the names of God when the soul leaves the body. So I got to play a role for that most sublime success in life for both my mother and father.
Wonderful.
And in one sense, the auspiciousness that started from the crisis of the kidnapping and the deprogramming, just to give so you're just to kidnap their adult son, they're so inimical.
Mm.
Back to when my mother passed away in 2010, it was at Abington Hospital in Jenkintown outside of Philadelphia. And I had gotten a call from my sister saying, "Oh yeah, you should come up." So I came up, and I didn't even go to my mother's apartment. I went to the hospital. My mother was sort of like in a hospice unit in the hospital. It's nice. They took care of her nicely. And so for like 3 days, I slept on the sofa in the hospital. And during the days and nights, I was with my mother chanting and or playing Srila Prabhupada chant. At one point, and my mother, she was still like verbal, and I was standing over her chanting japa, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And she opened her eyes and she looked at me. She said, "David, it sounds like Yiddish." So for my mother, that's very meaningful. Yiddish was the language that my mother and father spoke was really the language they grew up with. And when they didn't want my sister and I to understand, they would speak Yiddish.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sort of some combination of German and Hebrew. So I picked up some words of it. But, it's like my mother has a lot of affection. So she was saying, like, I accept this with appreciation and affection.
Okay.
It sounds like Yiddish.
It sounds like something I like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. It's very sweet to my ears and heart. Sounds like Yiddish. So then, okay, my mother passes away, leaves her body. And then within a few hours, and then I went to visit her home, her apartment, maybe about a 10-minute drive from the hospital. So I go into her home, and just to check things and like that, and before I go back to Florida. And I go in her bedroom by her night table. There's a book. And it's the book Beyond Birth and Death.
Wow.
Beyond Birth and Death. And there's different marker notes there. There's notes, sticky notes.
It's not kept there just for a look-see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not just for appearance.
Appearances, yes.
So then I look at the notes, and again, so this was 2010. My mother and father had been divorced since the late 70s. They both got remarried. And they weren't inimical with each other, but neither were they closely associating.
Right.
So the notes in the book, it was clearly my father's handwriting. So it was very heart-touching for me, because it was clear that in my mother's last days before she went to the hospital for the last time, she was with my father, and they were seriously discussing this book that their son had given them.
Wow, it's really amazing. It's amazing. It was your father's notes also.
Yes.
They had combined, everything is wonderful. They combined and they studied back.
They came together through Srila Prabhupada and Krishna conscious philosophy.
Okay.
Yeah. And so, Krishna says in the 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, gradually, step by step. So after the kidnapping, and then they saw that I'm standing strong.
Right.
All this was because, I had escaped from the rehab center in Iowa. And I had enough. I had enough money to get a Greyhound bus to Chicago. And I can remember because there was one of the henchmen who came with me to Iowa. And then after about a day, he left because they were convinced I was completely deprogrammed. So then at the rehab center in Iowa, there was a college student, maybe my age, mid-20s. I was 23 at the time. And there was an elderly lady. So I could see these were not the type of people who were going to tackle me on the street.
Right.
So then it was early morning, maybe 6 a.m., and I packed my backpack, and I come down the steps, and the college student lady are there. They said, what's happening? And I said, well, I was just faking it. I just want to chant Hare Krishna.
You told them?
I told them. I trusted they're not the type of people who are going to, try to wrestle me to the ground or something.
Right.
So then I walked to the bus station in Iowa City. And it was the next bus to Chicago was 2 hours. So I was waiting there. And then the bus came, and I was about to get on the bus, and walking comes the college student from the rehab center. And he comes and he talks to me. And he was he was trying to see am I clear? Am I disturbed? And then he could see I had no anger. I wasn't resentful with my parents or the kidnappers. I just want to practice Krishna consciousness.
Right.
That's what I'm going to do. So he wasn't argumentative. And then as I got on the bus, I turned to him, he turned to me, and he said, Haribol.
Oh, what a twist.
What a twist.
Okay.
Yeah. Because he he got that I'm making my authentic decision. The labels of brainwashing can be applied. Of course, Prabhupada has some comments like, well, yes, your brains need to be washed. Yeah. So, right.
So I just, because there's one little detail there, I can't let it go, if you don't mind. You said, this was the escape. This was the escape from the facility that you were previously entering. Okay, so it was not like a prison break kind of thing. It was just very natural, and
it was natural when I understood that no one was monitoring me, was going to like get physical.
Right.
I just walked away.
Okay. Krishna, he arranged the situation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. When the thugs were convinced that I was sufficiently seeing the light, and then they went back to Arizona. I think that's where they were.
Okay. Did you ever meet them again?
No.
Okay.
I could have filed charges and taken them to prison. And I remember when I went from Chicago to Detroit, back to State College, Pennsylvania, spent some days with my mentor, my Vartma Pradarshak Guru, Stelmadas.
Oh, okay.
And I went back to Philadelphia, and I remember I visited the ISKCON Philadelphia temple, and I spoke on the phone with a devotee lawyer, Bill Ogle, Balavanta Das, who in later years he and I became friends. And so he said, yeah, you could, because this is a federal crime, but if I wanted to go after the kidnappers, I would also need to go after my parents. And for me, it was just like, I wasn't able to get anyone.
Right.
I just want to practice Krishna consciousness, so I didn't pursue it.
The higher taste principle applies here also.
Yeah.
Okay. Amazing story. Amazing way how you came to Krishna and developed also through Krishna consciousness. And then you mentioned also previously that then you, I don't know in this podcast, but we were talking previously, then you started to get more, then you joined the temple, and became more serious in your practice. And then you started to work your way also up the ranks, so to speak.
Well, in the ISKCON organization, I had many services, including many titles and positions. Yeah. Well, for example, early in 1987, I accepted the service of temple president in Tel Aviv. Then, it's because so many chapters, but late in 1988, I led a book distribution party in the north of Israel, and we stumbled upon a group called the Druze, who the world tends to see as an unorthodox sect of Islam. But actually, the Druze themselves, or at least their sheikhs, know that they're a Vedic sect.
Or Vedic sect.
From ancient India. And they, for the past 1,000 years, they needed to pretend to be sort of Islamic to avoid persecution.
Okay, and you also wrote a book on this, right?
Yeah, then the first book I published is entitled Krishna, Israel, and the Druze, an Interreligious Odyssey.
And that's detailing this trip with the Sankirtan party. And
yes, and just amazing stories. Even though we personally were distributing sets of Prabhupada's books, mostly what we had in Hebrew, we had like Bhagavad Gita in Arabic, to every Druze library in Israel. Even though we'd already done that, their minister of education, his name was Salman Falach, their minister of education, he purchased about $15,000 of Prabhupada's books for every Druze library. Because they were seeing this is the roots of their own religious tradition. And he was one of the few Druze who spoke and read English fluently. So for his personal library, he got all of Prabhupada's books, Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, like that.
You preached to him personally, or it was how did he get so enthusiastic? How did he know so much?
Well, me and others,
right?
Mahalakshmi, my wife, and others on the Sankirtan podium. Personal relation, personal connection. Yeah, they're the top sheik in the Jews' world. His name was Sheikh Tarif Amin. And not just for the Druze in Israel, but Lebanon, Syria. He was probably like 100 years old at that time.
Wow.
Okay, which was late 80s, early 90s. We had many personal meetings with him. They would host us gorgeously. And at one of our meetings, he said he wants the Druze people to cooperate with the Hare Krishnas, Kigiza Afat, which means as one race. But he was pretty much giving permission for the Druze to intermarry with the devotees.
And that's not usually...
Oh, no.
Okay.
As they're known as being very isolated, very, very secluded. The Druze scriptures are very concealed.
What is the scripture?
I'm not aware of a name. And so, at the same time, their top sheiks would reveal to us and show us that the Druze scriptures, for example, they describe history dating back hundreds of millions of years with incarnations of God in the human form appearing regularly.
Very similar to the...
And not at all similar to a Judaic, Christian, or Islamic scripture.
Right.
Because the Bible goes back 5,000 years. Like that.
Yeah.
Their scriptures mention Krishna.
Oh, directly.
Their scriptures mention Bhagavad Gita.
Wow.
So we were just encountering these amazing parallels. They were taking hundreds of sets of Prabhupada's books.
Amazing.
Yeah. And so I wrote a book about that after I got back to the States.
If I may, just for everyone who's watching the podcast, a little disclaimer, we'll put all the links for these books that His Grace Dhira Govinda Prabhu has written in the description of this video. So are they for sale online on Amazon?
Yeah, they're available for me personally through Amazon.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So we'll put links there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then late in 1990, actually just before when Iraq was threatening to send Scud missiles to Israel, as they did eventually, we visited the USA. And my plan was to go back to Middle East, and there's lots of chapters in there. At that time, we had our daughter Sita was born in September 1990 at Rothschild Hospital in Haifa. So she was a few weeks old when we came to the United States. I was planning to go back to Israel, but we ended up staying in the United States, and eventually we relocated to North Florida, to North Florida. And well, the different chapters related to it, you said or asked Maitreya, Rishi Prabhu, a few minutes ago. Yeah, like in 1995, I was invited to join the board of directors of New Raman Reti, which is the name of ISKCON of Alachua, which even at that time was the largest devotee community in North America. And since then, it's grown exponentially. It was already growing exponentially. Starting in 1996, I was asked to serve as chairperson of the board of directors of the largest devotee community in North America. And over the next 6-7 years, I was on the board and served as chairman for most of those years. In 1998, the ISKCON GBC asked me to establish what became known as the ISKCON International Central Office of Child Protection. So we established that early in 1998. We actually established it legally as a nonprofit entity in the state of Florida called the Association for the Protection of Children. And I served as director of the ISKCON CPO, Child Protection Office, for more than 6 years into 2004. So I was serving in lots of positions and roles within the organization. I was also already beginning to develop services not connected with the organization. For example, in the mid-90s, I started my graduate programs But for my PhD programs, some of my projects, I developed what's called the Vedic Personality Inventory. It's a personality assessment tool based on the guna psychologies given in Bhagavad Gita, particularly chapters 14, 17, and 18. And we use that as a measurement tool to conduct the Hare Krishna Mahamantra studies.
I was just reading.
Yes.
Interesting.
And so that didn't have anything to do with the ISKCON institution. And so, so I was serving Child Protection Office. I was also, for more than 10 years, I was employed with the state of Florida in different roles, like children and family counselor with the Department of Foster Care.
Okay. So this was your occupation outside, your occupation on the side?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, from really 1993 through 2003, I had different positions with the state of Florida, while I was also getting my PhD, serving as chairperson of the board of directors of ISKCON Alachua, and serving as director of the Child Protection Office. Okay, so what was happening for me, and we had our second child, Abhimanyu, was born in 1993.
Nice name.
Abhimanyu, yes, I agree. It's Abhimanyu and Sita, so we had two small children at that time. All right, so what was happening for me is like, Hare Krishna.
Someone's using the shower, though, the gum jutting.
Yeah, it's mystical.
It's great. Krishna is...
Yeah, getting confirmation. So, I found myself, for various reasons, which I could get into, less than pleasant reasons, I found myself like more and more unenthused at the idea of like encouraging people to connect with this organization called ISKCON. At the same time, I wasn't experienced, because, I over the years and decades, I experienced many devotees, and they become bitter and disenchanted with Krishna consciousness, and they give it up. But that wasn't happening for me. I was feeling more and more enthusiastic to chant Hare Krishna, read Prabhupada's books, share Prabhupada, share Krishna consciousness. I was becoming more and more enlivened, and less and less enlivened, or less euphemistically, I was feeling more and more repulsed and disgusted at the idea of bringing people in connection with the institution. And I was a main face of the institution. The Child Protection Office, like ISKCON had maybe 27 ministries. This was the most prominent ministry because there was a lot of scandals connected with child protection, which, because of that pressure, to the ISKCON GPC's credit, under pressure and threat, whatever it is, but the fact that they did fund and form a child protection office, that's to their credit. It's a step forward, definitely to their credit. And so they had New Raman Reddy, the largest devotee community in North America, and other roles too. So I was like a face of the organization, the institution, and it was not in my integrity to be part of that or to bring people to it. At the same time, I was more and more encouraged and enthused and joyful to bring people to Prabhupada and read his books and So that was kind of part of my process there as we get into the mid-late 90s, early 2000s.
Okay, I understand. And, well, maybe I won't go into so much about the reasons why. Well, we can also, but I just want to explore something just a little
Sure.
and deeper also about, from your point of view, maybe more like a personal thing, because you seem to have a lot of history in not just leadership roles, but also how do you say, occupations concerning the protection of children or psychology. What inspired you about this particular field? Yeah.
Okay.
Do you mind just...
Okay, because that's another part of my history I'm glad to speak about. Okay. Right. So I mentioned I have an older sister, Carol. And so back when I was like 18 years old in the late 70s, she was already like trained as a counselor, and she was involved in like the human potential movement, and she was involved with an organization called Livestream. Okay. Maybe some of your viewers have heard of things like EST or Landmark.
Not familiar.
No, yeah, any of these are like personal growth seminar organizations. And the biggest one, certainly in North America, maybe in the world, back in the late 70s, was called EST, Erhard Seminar Trainings. And the second biggest one was called Livestream. And so my sister was part of it. And not that I was particularly interested, but she kind of got her little brother David to do some seminars in the late 70s when I was 18 years old. And it sparked an interest in me. Like it started, like for me, like awakened me to some self-awareness and encountering myself with deeper honesty than I'd done until that point. So that moved me. Actually, when I finished high school and I went into college, I was an engineering major, not so college. Because, I was an engineering major because I could do like math and science well. And I could see that at 17 years old, with just like a bachelor's degree in engineering, one could get like a good paying job. It wasn't very deeply thoughtful, but okay, so I was an engineering major. And I was doing well, like in the calculus courses and like that. But then after that summer of 79, I was 18 years old. And then I had some awareness raising through these seminars. And then I realized, like, I wasn't really happy in the engineering.
Okay.
Like, I could do it, but like, this isn't fulfilling and meaningful.
You got a higher taste from the coaching and
self-awareness.
Yeah.
Correct. The term coaching wasn't used in those days, but essentially, yes, that's the terms we would use today. Yeah. So I was still in my second and third year at university. In a sense, that was the most depressing years of my life.
Depressed? You said depressing?
Depressing, okay. But I mean it in a positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, because like the Bhagavatam describes, there's two happy persons, the fool or the pig in mud and the Paramahamsa. So you might say, before 18 years old, I was also depressed and not happy, but at least I didn't have much self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
So then after that, when I went back to like university studying engineering, I was aware that like, I don't really like this. I don't get fulfilled, you know? I remember after my third year, it's a 4-year engineering degree. And after 3 years, I got an engineering apprenticeship at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard, which was like a prized apprenticeship for, future engineers. It was like really, and I was there, and I'd be there, and like with the T-square, and it wasn't computerized in those days.
Okay.
And like, and I was just like looking at the clock. Wow, it's 10 after 9. Soon it'll be 15 after 9. Okay. And like, could see like, I don't want to do this for 40 years.
No connection at all.
I don't want to do this for 4 days. Like that. And then I did more kind of seminar work and personal introspection work. And that was the summer of 1981. I was 20 years old. And then when I went back to university, even though I was only 1 year away from a university, an engineering degree, I had connected with the courage towards Paramahamsa, right? Because the Paramahamsa actually has realization to act on the principles of consciousness, whereas the fool is just not aware. In between, when you have awareness, but not the courage to act on it. So that was me for those 2 years.
Okay.
Then after the third year, after the naval shipyard engineering, I went back, and even though I was just 2 semesters away from an engineering degree, I took a stand. I'm switching, and I switched my major to psychology.
Wow. So close to getting a degree. Amazing.
Yeah. And for years, my parents had heard me speak about, I think I'm thinking to not do engineering, and they weren't happy about it.
There's another contributing reason, perhaps, why they were so, well, you use the word inimical, but they used such a drastic measure because it was quite a drastic change.
Actually, that's not how it played out. Because after that third year, because till then, when I had doubts about engineering, they could see I had nothing positive to go to. So they said, well, just stick with it because you can get a good job. But then even though I was just 2 semesters away from an engineering degree, they saw I was clear and I'm switching to get a Bachelor of Science in Psychology. They completely supported me because they could see I had something clear to go to. I wasn't just I wasn't just going away from something.
Right.
So really it was just like 1 extra semester to get a Bachelor's of Science in Psychology, because for my cognates and electives, I used all the math and engineering courses I had taken. Battery. Should we keep going? Okay. All right. So I switched to psychology. For me, it wasn't just about a change of major. For me, this related to shifting my focus from that which is more external to that which is more subtle.
And psychology is, in the material sciences and educations, it's kind of like the closest subject to internal reflection.
Focusing on materials to mind and intellect. Simultaneously at that time, that's when I was taking prashad, beginning to read some of Prabhupada's small books, Science of Self-Realization.
It's all lining up.
It's all lining up.
Right.
So for me, that shift from engineering psychology, that led in the continuum to shifting to that which is even more subtle than mind and intellect, spirit, and the source of spirit. So that's like that. So at that time, I volunteered. I got accepted to get trained as a short-term and crisis intervention center in State College, Pennsylvania. The name of the center, I'm not making this up, the name of the agency was On Drugs Incorporated.
Okay, On Drugs Incorporated.
It was formed in the 1960s.
Uh-huh.
And after about a year of serving on the hotlines, walk-in center, suicidal clients and drug addictions, and I accepted responsibility to direct the training program for new counselors. And so that's how I got into like human potential, transformation, counseling, training counselors. And then, summer of 1983, backpacking around Europe, visiting the Hare Krishna centers in Europe, chanting japa. Then I was getting inspiration about like utilizing my experiences and trainings in personal development, transformation, counseling in the service of Prabhupada's movement. There were some seeds of inspiration. And then what I was finding in a delightful way was that what I was so attracted to in the human potential sector and person-centered counseling, that I didn't need to give up anything in embracing Krishna consciousness. Because in Prabhupada's teachings, I was finding that all those principles, and I could get into details, and that's what I do in my writings and my seminars, all those teachings, all those principles, personal responsibility, empathy, consciousness in the result, living from the core of being, all those teachings found their origin, perfection, completion, and most sublime application in Bhakti Yoga. And so the kind of what we've developed over the decades through the Satvatove programs.
That's your personal coaching
organization. Yeah.
You
developed it, with Marie Glasheen, Mother Malini, like that. that's kind of an expansion of my inspiration of not just dovetailing these fields in Krishna consciousness, but demonstrating conceptually and experientially how all that is valid in these fields finds its perfection and completion in Bhagavatam.
Wow.
And so that's what we're doing through these programs.
Right. That's very nice. And I suppose that also it helps people in the fields of psychology and these various different these sciences to relate to Krishna consciousness, which sometimes Krishna consciousness maybe is even scrutinized as as you said before, like a brainwashing, called by those same people. So it's very nice, I think, that you're such a qualified person in the field and you're relating it to these people, making it something very approachable.
Yeah, I like to think so, and that is my perception. An example that I shared with you, I think a day or two ago, maybe it was yesterday. For example, one of our branches is the Satvatove Institute School of Transformative Coaching. Life coaching, very popular. I've been sold one of your Bliss magazines. Krishna is the ideal life coach. So true. Yeah. So it's a life coaching school completely accredited at the highest level by the International Coach Federation, which is the most recognized coach training school accreditation body internationally. And so our Satvatove School of Coaching was increasingly recognized as like on the leading edge of spiritually based approaches to transformational coaching. So in 2017, ACTO, it's an acronym, the Association of Coach Training Organizations. That's not just coaches. These are like the founders of the major coach training schools on the planet, the leading trainers of trainers. So their international conference that year was in Toronto. And they invited me as a representative of the Satvatove Institute School of Transformative Coaching. They invited me to conduct a keynote workshop, which we entitled Mantra Meditation and Transformative Coaching. There was about 150 at the conference. And again, like most of these are people maybe in their 50s, 60s, 70s. These were like young coaches developing their career. Many of them, like they were clinical psychologists for 30 years. They decided to do something related, but different. So they developed a coaching school, that sort of thing. So about 35 of them came to my workshop. And we explained the philosophy of mantra, all based on Prabhupada's teachings. We mentioned A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami quite a bit, the Vedas, the philosophy of the psychology, the history of mantra. And there's lots of lively questions, and it's how we use mantra in coaching. And towards the end of the workshop, I gave out japa beads and to everyone. And we taught them how to chant japa and relating it to the coaching process, because so many forms of meditation are accepted in counseling psychology.
Oh, okay. It's quite mainstream.
So this is mantra meditation.
Right.
Yeah. And it was a main reason I was invited is because of my dissertation. The title of my dissertation is Effects of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra on Stress, Depression, and the Three Gunas. So they could see that it's evidence based. It's not just some sentimental hippie thing. It's evidence based. So it's a type of meditation, and we all chanted around a japa together. Many of them got from me sets of japa beads to use with the coaches they train and the clients they coach. So it's just one example.
Okay, that's great. So, I like what you were saying, or you said about how this perfection, for psychology, and it's really, because, psychology by itself can only go so far. It can fix the problems of the mind, but then eventually we have to actually give up the body in total, and there'll be so much that
material psychology is limited. Actually, there's a saying about modern psychology. that first modern psychology lost its soul, then it lost its conscience, and now it's lost its mind altogether.
And why is that?
Well, if you look at the flow, kind of like, into like this century and into the previous century, into the 20th century, just trying to take anything spiritual, anything non-physical out of it. Okay. And so losing its soul, then losing its consciousness and conscience, like taking out any sense of morality or ethics.
Okay.
And then starting maybe especially in the 50s into the 60s with like the behavioristic approaches, then it's like losing its mind altogether, because then the theories are like, not just there's no such thing as soul or consciousness, there's no such thing as mind. It's just all mechanistic, reductionistic, deterministic. Just chemical reactions. And so that's where you had like the increase, the boom in psychotropic medications, because like psychiatric medications to treat mental disorders.
Okay. Just chemical based.
Yeah, because if we're just a bunch of chemicals, first of all, it's pretty depressing.
Yeah. You might need the pills themselves.
You need the pills.
Good idea.
And but let's just adjust the chemistry. So, so we're getting not just the spiritual, but the Vedic basis, the Vedic basis of true support, timeless support.
Right. Yeah, because Krishna is describing psychology in the Bhagavad Gita.
So much.
So much in the Bhagavatam.
So much.
It's very interesting. And I myself, I'm not at all. I actually was beginning to study psychology. I was in college.
Yeah.
But it's obviously a very interesting topic, especially if you're, trying to preach Krishna consciousness, because you have to deal with individual persons. You have to deal with their psychology and kind of see where they're coming from and try to relate Krishna consciousness to them. So it's also a very interesting topic for me from that point of view.
You're personally interested in it.
Personally interested also because I'm coming from a background. I was trying to spread Krishna consciousness as a monk or whatever. But what I was thinking of, just because, I don't want to take too much of your valuable time, which has obviously been very pleasurable so far, but, and it's been such a pleasant podcast, but now there's like a heavier topic, just throw in there. But I think it does work progressively with what we talked about, because you have a background which is the most qualified to talk about this topic. You have experience there. And I think that, the Krishna conscious philosophy, what Srila Prabhupada gave us, is so important. And it's a shame that things that are unpalatable sometimes cloud people's appreciation or vision of Srila Prabhupada's
actual essential teachings and process.
Exactly. So I just wanted to address this topic for someone who's new to the topic and is not aware. It seems kind of shocking that children can undergo abuse in an organization, and one aspect of it. Perhaps you can elaborate first of all. They create the organization created this child protection. Office. Yeah. There were some scandals that happened.
Yes.
But then you resigned from the position. Yeah. Why did you resign from the position?
Okay. Well, I served as director of the ISKCON Central Office, the International Central Office of Child Protection, we'll call it the CPO, after 6 years. Okay. So, in one sense, even if everything was rainbows and butterflies and a picnic, it just, in one sense, I felt complete in doing that service for Srila Prabhupada and his movement for 6 years. I felt complete and kind of time to move on. Okay, but for sure, so even if everything was great, I may have moved on anyway, because like 6 years, and there's a lot of heaviness in that service. Not so much even like dealing with the child abusers, but like the organizational politics to cover up the child abuse and things like that. So so there's my personal process, and 6 years was enough for me in that particular service. Also, though, for sure, more and more of the service became about like trying to like pierce through these, how can I call these, kind of gross, dark, oftentimes malicious political manipulations. And that, like, I am enriched by like conducting coaching and therapy and developing programs to prevent child abuse and education programs. But as far as like dealing with organizational politics to cover up the lies about the deceptions and trying to expose that, I did plenty of that. But at some point, like, I'm kind of like had enough of that, and that was increasing, and like more and more of that service became that, and like kind of, I'm sure if like I was clear that Srila Prabhupada wanted me to keep dealing with that, but I got like, I couldn't get that Prabhupada also wanted me to come and move on from that.
Okay. I think just for the viewers who are maybe not so familiar with the topic, what scale is the abuse happening? What is going on there actually?
Okay. So first of all, I left that service in June 2004, and now it's January 2024. So I'm not directly in that role. I have no direct connection with any organizational position for about 20 years.
Right.
So I just want to say that, like, I'm not on the front lines. Okay. That said, if I look back, even like, this past 4 years, there's probably been about a dozen podcasters who interviewed me about this topic. And so that service follows me, and not just podcasters. Over those 20 years, regularly, parents and temple administrators, they'll contact me regularly, and I tell them, well, I don't have any position or role anymore, but they want to consult me. They get upset, and they're not getting responses. So I'm still involved. Okay. But I just said, like, I'm not on the front lines. I'm not in a position anymore. I can say for sure, in certain parts of the ISKCON world, there was extensive, terrible. I say was. When saying was, I'm not saying that it's not. I'm not saying it's not happening now.
But just when you were operating as the
and before that, because when I started in 1998, I got all sorts of case files dating back to the late 70s, and there was a lot of horrific stuff going on.
Even in the late 70s?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, late 70s, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. There are a lot of horrific stuff going on, and a lot of it wasn't even just, not just, it was like terrible child maltreatment, physical, sexual, emotional, then there was just like deliberate cover-up.
Okay.
So a lot of our role was to protect children, to reveal what happened, what was happening, and because again, a lot of people, even though I have no position anymore, they keep me informed, and they want me involved, and I'm still writing things like that, and so at least in some parts of the organization, there's strong cause for concern, and that's very sad violations are continuing to go on.
Okay,
for sure.
It's obviously concerning, but we've seen it happen in not just in ISKCON, or that it's happened in the Catholic movement.
Yeah, the Boy Scouts,
and have a common thing. Why? But then some people will challenge that this is a spiritual movement. We're attesting that this is a very effective spiritual process of purification, with higher taste. So it seems not to go hand in hand. How come there's so much widespread abuse of children, which is one of the most terrible things to happen, really? And at the same time, we're propagating that the people who take to Krishna consciousness, they attain a higher taste, and surely then they wouldn't be involved in child abuse. So for newcomers, I think it's maybe a little bit of a hiccup in their acceptance of Krishna.
They can become discouraging. Do I really want to get involved in this?
Yeah. So how to explain what's going on to people like this?
Okay, I'll share a story from my early days at the Child Protection Office. We established the office. Actually, I was the first director. The first secretary's name is E.G. Das, Eric Johnson. So he and I established Child Protection Office starting in March 1998. We actually opened our doors in April 1998. E.G. has served in that role for almost 3 years. Then Malini Dasi, she became the next secretary of Child Protection Office. And then, so in my early days, maybe this is the first month or a few, so I was conducting an interview with a young man, maybe your age. He was maybe his late 20s at that time, maybe 30, like that. And so he told me his true story, that when he was about 8, 9 years old, and then his mother joined Krishna consciousness, and she joined a temple, ISKCON temple in a big city in the United States. And, and he's like 8, boy. And she sends him, so I'm going to say it's around 77. Okay, I might not have the years exact, but I'm real close, if not exact. She sends him to the school in Vrindavan. She's in the United States.
In Vrindavan, India.
Vrindavan, India. Not New Vrindavan, West India. And that's another story. They've had a lot of problems, certainly from the late 70s into the 80s, New Vrindavan, into the 90s. But Vrindavan, India. Okay. So he told me, so I'm interviewing him, and he's in his late 20s, and he said that he's 8, 9 years old. Naturally, he was homesick for mom. Also, he said, primarily his experience there in Vrindavan as a boy was sweet, and he's just a sweet Vrindavan. He remembers the peacocks and Bhagavad Gita. All right. And he said the principal, the headmaster of the school, was someone named Dr. Sharma. Now, Srila Prabhupada, he asked Dr. Sharma to direct the school. Prabhupada personally asked, you can see in the conversations, he approved it. Now, my understanding is Dr. Sharma, he was not a disciple of Srila Prabhupada. He was like an elderly Indian gentleman with a lot of experience in education and directing educational schools and projects. I don't even know if Dr. Sharma was like a Vaishnava. He might have been an impersonalist. Not so clear to me.
Materially qualified.
So this young man, he tells me that sometimes Dr. Sharma would slap them.
Okay.
And he said, when Dr. Sharma hit us, we knew we deserved it. And he said we felt his care and love. Okay. So, in November 1977, there's Prabhupada's disappearance passed. And then, hearing from this young man, then a few weeks later, early in 78, there's the first GBC meetings without Prabhupada in that form of presence. And he said, so then the GBC, they completely changed the regime. And they kicked out Dr. Sharma and his team. And one of his team was Yashodananda. Yashodananda, maybe.
Right, okay, yes, of course, yeah.
Yashodananda was part of the team there. So the description I got from this young man. He was like 8, 9 years old, and he said it was like this violent takeover, and they like kicked out all the teachers and Dr. Sharma out.
Yashodanandan and
Dr. Sharma and his group, which included Yashodanandan,
okay,
and others, kicked him out, and like it was like he was like terrorized. So then the young man tells me there in that interview in 1998, he said, "From that day, my childhood became a nightmare."
okay.
And they make this all sorts of horrific stories of egregious, sadistic abuse and things. So I'm just into this story because, okay, he said Dr. Sharma would hit us. When he hit us, we felt his care like that. And after that, then it was just like it was like the gurus and their sadistic henchmen in the name of teachers. He said that from that day, so I'm just giving this example that Srila Prabhupada, apart from being like transcendentally inspired Shakti Avatar, just on every platform he knew what he was doing. And then, okay, then they destroyed, they willfully destroyed what Prabhupada had put into place. And there's one example. Another example I heard, because I served intensely in this field for more than 6 years in ISKCON, and even since then I'm hearing a lot. I could go on and on, but this is some example. So like, Prabhupada was on the roof of Mayapur, and he's meeting with some of the leaders from around the world. So some representatives of the schools, the education come in. And when some of them asks, and Srila Prabhupada, what should we feed the children? So Prabhupada's like in a casual mood, laying back and like that. It's not like a
Interrogation.
Yeah, or writing a legal document. So what should Prabhupada said? Rice and dal and sabji, 2 or 3 chapatis. So then they took it back to the schools, to some of the schools, and then it became a rule. A child is not allowed to have more than 2 chapatis, Prabhupada said. So just kind of like, missing the mood. Right. Yeah, there's letters where Prabhupada's hearing like that they're forcing the children to chant japa while they're marching like in the military. And the Prabhupada like needs to write, to some of his followers, like he said, like he writes, children are supposed to play. It's kind of sad that Prabhupada would need to say that. Yeah. Children are supposed to play, and Krishna consciousness is like naturally fun. Yeah. And if you force them, they'll get a bad taste. Just basic psychology.
He even says that they shouldn't be forced.
They shouldn't be forced. No, exactly. Yeah, they shouldn't be forced. I can speak about, not that I'm any example, but in my children, Sita and Abhi, I never even asked them to chant japa. What to speak of force, but they just saw that their dad was doing 16 rounds per day, and they went through their phases of life. But since they're teenagers, they're chanting at least 16 rounds per day.
Yeah, the charity stress test. That's the actual way how to example.
And it was never anything in me like you should chant japa at least this many rounds. Just they felt that's what I do, and yeah, and I mean, as a dad, maybe I had some strains and some shortcomings, but yeah, it's just like isn't it like never any question of forcing Krishna consciousness, and Prabhupada is basic psychology,
Right.
And you say if you force them, they'll have a bad taste, and they'll get bitter, and they'll go away. Right. So like Prabhupada needs to explain some common sense things. I could go on, but so that can relate to like the distinction between what Prabhupada gave in all ways, philosophically, child care, child protection, and then the deviations from that. Sometimes well-meaning, sometimes not well-meaning. Sometimes well-meaning deviations, sometimes not.
Well-meaning deviations for the purpose of a higher cause.
Like, oh well, we thought this was a good idea
Right. Yeah, but it goes wrong somewhere down the line. Yeah. I think that's also kind of a difficult. It's something that I've noticed when, how do you say, losing this topic sounds a bit casual, but I mean, when researching this topic, I saw that some people who are maybe a bit more, I dare say, casual to Krishna consciousness, or maybe have not accepted Srila Prabhupada in the capacity that you or some of the other disciples of Srila Prabhupada have. I find it kind of a disturbing thing is that, perhaps natural from a mundane point of view, they begin to criticize Srila Prabhupada himself in connection, because they say, well, if Srila Prabhupada is an omniscient personality, how come this all happened? And perhaps as someone who's studying this and as a disciple of Srila Prabhupada, you'd be able to just shed some light on that particular aspect, because I think some people are quite confused.
Okay. I can honestly say personally, the more that I've studied this maybe as much as or more than anyone else in the world. Of course, not that I was like a youth or child who went through the brutal abuse, but from the services I did directly in Child Protection Office, I sort of had like the global vision of what was happening in different places, different times. The more I actually studied and understood how Prabhupada dealt with this situation with children, the more my trust in Prabhupada strengthened and increased. Then most people are just shocked to hear that. Oh, but it's because but I read on the internet this and that. Like, okay, well, apart from what you heard on the internet, if you actually see how Prabhupada dealt with situations, just apart from spiritually realized, Krishna conscious, but just empathic, personal. I remember he grew up in the movement, and he actually got formally initiated from Srila Prabhupada when he was 12 years old, like that, and he's clearly very clear. But he and some of the others, they would say, like Srila Prabhupada would be maybe walking around Vrindavan, let's say Vrindavan, for example, with his different managers in the project, and Prabhupada would see, some of the children. And he'd miss it. How come that child doesn't have socks? Yeah, how come she doesn't have a sweater? Just like personal care, personal care. So the more Prabhupada, because first of all, Kali Yuga, even despite conscious sattvic measures to protect children, there's going to be child neglect, there's going to be child abuse. That's going to happen. It's the nature of the age. And when something like that came to Prabhupada's attention, he dealt with it consciously, responsibly, caringly. Some could criticize he overreacted. There was one Mataji came. Maybe you've seen the video of Kishore Mataji. You've seen that.
Is it the one about what Prabhupada wants to do to the...
Yeah. He should be hung. He had to be hung. So you can see someone like Kishore who went through such hell, the way her child was treated.
Right.
But you can see, it's not like her affection for Srila Prabhupada is interrupting, because he's sincere how he dealt with it. So, yes. So, and then there's different factors. One thing, someone that comes from it comes to a spiritual movement. So it's sincere spiritual seekers. Sometimes sincere spiritual seekers, but sometimes it can be mixed with wanting to kind of escape and escape from the difficulties of material life. And so not so practical. There's a well-known letter, and Prabhupada, he's surprised. He writes to a Mataji, Well, apparently she wanted to leave her child to do book distribution or deity worship. And then Prabhupada writes to her, your child is your deity.
Right.
Yeah. And so, I guess Prabhupada was kind of like surprised that like the parents didn't kind of get that, when they were up. That's my sense. So, yeah, so I've maybe studied how Prabhupada dealt with these things as much or more than anyone. And my trust for Prabhupada deepens. Also, let's understand, because like sincere spiritual seekers, Krishna conscious, there can be maybe on average more naivete. And so there are some, I would say most of those, my experience, most of those who let's talk about child sexual abuse, most of those who molested children, they didn't come to the movement to find children to sexually abuse. But maybe they were in a particularly stressful situation, and then in that stress, different propensities came out. But there were a few. They came to the movement to prompt children, and then devotees can be aspiring devotees can be, because true devotional consciousness is very grounded. It's an la-di-da. But those who come to Krishna consciousness, they can have a particularly naive side, and then predators, they can smell that, and they can take advantage, and they can become, and they can come into a leadership position pretty quick because they're intelligent. So that happened.
Okay.
But I'm 99% sure it still happened in my organization.
Okay.
So that's part of the dynamic.
And does there seem to be any end in sight to it, or is it just what is a solution for this occurrence, or is there a solution for it?
Well, a solution, sure. I mean, when in terms of the ISKCON organization, I'm not too hopeful. Like if I'm talking to a parent, I emphasize, you accept 100% responsibility for the education and protection of your children. And that I'm not saying don't send them to an ISKCON school, but if you're doing it, you're responsible. Who is their teacher? Research has shown the more parental involvement there is, the less a chance the child will be maltreated. I know any schools my children went to, I was always on the board of directors. I was always involved. So on an individual level, and this is about 12 years ago. I was sitting in my home office, and there was actually an ISKCON guru visiting me. And this is already 8 years since I left Child Protection Office, but he was talking to me about one particular place in the world and how wonderful it is. And he encourages all his disciples to send their children there. And and he wasn't asking me for advice. He just, I kind of know, they're getting abused. And I was right, And so, because even if your Guruji says send them there, you're responsible.
Right.
If you blindly follow your Guruji, your child gets abused, I'm not blaming the Guru. Mm. You're responsible.
You can't just ship all your responsibility on
the devotee.
Right.
And right. So on an organizational level, again, certainly there is improvements. Mm. Certainly there's improvements. Just the fact that in 1998 the GBC not just established, they asked me to establish the office. They funded it. Then after some years, they took their funding away. Now I hear the funding is 5 to 10% of what it was then. So on an organizational level, there are some signs that there's a systemic commitment for continuing egregious child abuse.
Okay, on organization.
And cover up and deception. Even until very, very recently, I could get into details, which I could, because it's been published on different threads and this and that. But on the organizational level, there's dedication to I'm not sure. It's like I can't exaggerate, because almost like the truth is the punchline. No, like they're dedicated. They're going to have child molesters worshipped on the altar, on the same altar as Srimati Radharani. They're dedicated to that. It's in their policies. Okay, so organization, like I don't have too much hope, but I don't want to paint with too broad a brush. I know there are some schools like connected with ISKCON that I do trust the leaders. I do trust the headmaster or the teachers.
You're familiar with many.
I'm familiar with them. Yeah. Oh, yeah, but as far as like on an international level, systemically, there's some bad stuff still going on. Yes. Okay. Guaranteed. Sad.
And is the law enforcement, or does that have anything to do with it? Is there anything that, like, I saw one video of a particular Swami saying that if the children have a problem, they should contact the police. I don't know, it sounds a little bit of an insensitive thing to say, but is there anything that the law enforcement can do? Or is it purely to be worked out by the organization? Because that doesn't seem so hopeful.
I'll respond to that. Okay. All right. So there are a few facets to that conversation. So one is, all right. So for sure, we would, in the Child Protection Office, we would encourage, recommend, direct everyone to learn and follow your local laws regarding reporting instances where there's reasonable cause to suspect a child's being maltreated. He had to cooperate with governmental, social service, and law enforcement agencies. Yeah, so that's true. Okay. At the same time, I hear this, so I even think maybe a month ago I wrote something about people in misconception. Just call the police. Okay. So but even left, and there are situations where, of course, okay, here's a situation. 1998, early 98, and some young men, maybe in their early 20s, they came to me. They told me I was the one they most trusted in the community in North Florida. And I know and they said that when they were in the Gurukul, when they were 11, 12 years old, that sort of age, the headmaster, who actually had a big position in ISKCON education by that time, 98, but they're talking about like in the early 90s, late 80s, he sexually molested them.
Okay.
All right. So it became, because I was involved with the state of Florida, and I had a lot of capacities. It was just before I accepted the service to develop the ISKCON Child Protection. So with one of the young men, I went to the sheriff's office. I went to the police. Okay. Right. So the sheriff heard this situation, and he said, so we were in Florida, but the different transgressions happened in other states, California, Texas, New York.
So the sheriff has jurisdiction, right?
Right.
Different states.
Right. So the sheriff said, okay, well, it can be you, the one who's the alleged victim, or your parents, because it's the alleged victims or confirmed victims if they're minors, and also their parents can take it to the court to put the perpetrator in prison. So in that particular, but the sheriff said, like, if you're not ready to file charges, nothing I can do legally, or your parent, and even if you are ready, it's not our jurisdiction because the crime happened somewhere else. So in that particular instance, none of the four young men or their parents chose to pursue it legally. Understandably, because then they'd need to like hire lawyers in this state and that state, and so they didn't pursue it. So myself, as David Dhira Govinda Das, in my capacity as Children and Family Counselor with the state of Florida, my capacity as chairman of the board of directors of New Ram Minreti, I don't have the the authority to file charges. I wasn't the victim. I'm not the parents of the minor who was a victim or alleged victim. So just say, well, just go to the police. Yeah, so sure. If the victim or their parents want to go to the police, we fully encourage that. And yeah, well, there was, and sometimes police, law enforcement, and social services, sometimes they can make the situation worse. How is it possible? Yeah. Well, first of all, understand, especially like maybe it's like sexual abuse, that we want to be sensitive. Why not just go to the police? And it's like, well, because then you need to tell the story again and again. And sometimes even if the law enforcement or social service employees, even if they're well-meaning and trained, and sometimes they're not sometimes they're not trained, sometimes very prudent, and then they can, and then it just, the whole thing becomes more public in the community, and then the victim can feel re-victimized. I've seen many, both with the state of Florida and ISKCON, by the interrogator, and the interrogator starts blaming the alleged victim and then mean to tell the story again, and they don't feel believed, and it can become re-traumatizing. So it doesn't always make things better. There are many situations where, yeah, one or more of the victims went to the police. As Child Protection Office, we of course cooperated, and the perpetrator is in prison. There are situations like that, but it's not so simplistic. So what I just shared now was Florida. Okay, I remember early in I visited ISKCON Mayapur every year for 4 years consecutively, 99 through 2002, because that was the most egregious, severe abuse in ISKCON history, especially from the late 70s to the early 90s, and continuing probably to today. Okay. Hare Krishna. So, okay, so early in 99, I'm there, and I'm doing a lot of interviews, a lot of sleuthing, a lot of investigation, spying, the whole thing. I've written a lot of reports about those things, which are publicly available. I'm talking to one young man, again, maybe he's, maybe there in 1999, maybe he's 25 years old. So he's saying, look, dear Govinda, if I tell you what happened, probably tomorrow or the next day, my mother will be drowned in the Ganges.
Wow.
It's dead serious.
Okay.
And then the idea of, why don't you go to the police? We could imagine some tragicomic scene where, like, maybe the chief of police is the one drowning Mata in the Ganges.
Because the police situation over there is also not
the police situation, and they're connected with ISKCON, and ISKCON has a lot of pedophile. I'm just being straight up here.
Yeah.
ISKCON, especially that program, is like, I could tell you, in 1998, when I read the case files that I inherited, when I started Child Protection Office, case files dating back to late 70s, it was clear to me, if you just put these files on the desk of like a child protection investigator in New York City, or Gainesville, Florida, or London, and the child protection investigator would read through it, they would just say, well, this is clearly a multi-generational ring of violent pedophiles, to child sex abusers, because they wouldn't have anything like, but he's a sannyasi. They wouldn't have anything like, but he's an authorized Diksha guru. How can you say that? Okay, but I'm exaggerating, but I'm not exaggerating, because you got this like idiotic mentality, and then perpetrators take advantage of that. But like a child protection investigator, no, this is like violent, sadistic ring, multi-generational. So it is, yeah, and then it would be like gross insensitivity to say to the 25-year-old in Mayapur, after he says, look, the miller will be down on the ground, so I told you what happened.
Right.
Why don't you take it to the police?
Yeah. I can see the point.
Yeah, you can see that.
Yeah.
But it's common, or like Facebook threads, I mean, talk about it. And even let's look in from another perspective. Okay, so even if we take it to the police, and the police do a good job, and the social service, and there are situations like that. Okay, there are situations, and let's say the perpetrator ends up spending time in prison. Okay, nice. Okay, but then let's say the perpetrator gets out of prison, serves his time, and he comes back, and then the police are along for the government. They're not concerned whether he's invited to give a Bhagavatam class or lead the kirtan at the Sunday feast and like that. That's not their concern. But we're concerned about that. We're concerned about that. And so that's why, in addition to cooperating with governmental agencies, also an internal process and system is important.
Mm-hmm. And is there any such system currently in place?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's what we established with Child Protection Office.
So you can't give the classes or...
Yeah, that's what we did. Now, so like, I know in my 6 years as director, we issued what's called official decisions on, I think, close to 100 cases. And we opened files of maybe 300 cases, and we issued official decisions with investigation, adjudication, and the official decisions would say like, for at least 5 years, he cannot, in an ISKCON project, lead a class or a kirtan, and for a lifetime, he can never have any association with children, and if he violates this, then he's not allowed to set foot on property. So, the system in place.
Yeah.
I can tell you, the systems we set in place, starting in 98, professionals in so many fields, law enforcement, law, therapist of convicted child sex offenders, the therapist of youth who've been abused as children, social workers, they put in writing how impressed they are with the systems.
Yeah.
They said other groups like Catholic Church should emulate what ISKCON has done.
Okay, that's your credit.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to serve Prabhupada's movement in that capacity. Now, a big problem was that systems would be in place, but particularly if the perpetrators were persons of influence and position or close friends of persons, then in many instances, and high-profile cases, the leadership of the organization, they would ignore the constraints and restrictions when applied to them or their close friends. And in some cases, because their close friends, they're too much about them. So kind of like, you're not going to apply in this. So it would be in situations where perpetrators and the Child Protection Office would issue its official decision after quite rigorous, fair. And I can say, in my service with the Child Protection Office, I was never out to get anyone. It didn't matter to me whether the alleged abuser was a congregation member or the pot washer or a GBC. I was always equally ready and interested to find evidence that would convict as evidence that would acquit. Okay? But then if there was, and there continues to be instances where it's a high-profile person, then ISKCON leadership just wouldn't follow, and a high-profile person would stay in their position, and they would stay in leadership position, in high-profile position, still happening today. And then and there's like the question, what message does that send? Let's say someone was abused by someone, or your best friend as a child was abused by someone, and then the organizational Child Protection Office said he can't do that. He's restricted. That he has this restriction. But then you go in, and then he's getting the Maha Garland at the temple, and he's giving the classes It's just like it's like it re-traumatizes. It's like a knife in the heart.
Right. Salt in the wound.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you. It's getting a little bit on time, but there's just kind of, if I can, just for one point, because we here at Bliss, it's a fairly small organization outside of ISKCON, but the Gurukul, the school for children, I think is an accurate translation.
Sure.
That is part of Prabhupada's movement, his teachings. It's an essential part of Vedic culture. So it's an inevitable part of the movement, right? Because people will become married, they'll have children.
Yes.
So we also need to, the organizers of any organization outside of ISKCON need to be aware that this can also happen to them.
Yes.
So what are preventative measures or mentalities that we can cultivate or be aware of that stop the problems happening in the future when we hope ourselves to establish guru rules, which are...
Sure. Okay. Okay. Again, I mentioned the parental involvement, screening. There's nothing foolproof. It's Kali Yuga. But if anyone's going to be a teacher, I remember once this was in North Florida, and some devotees were running a summer camp. It wasn't a school, it was a summer camp for children. And there was different applications. And someone applied to be like a counselor at the summer camp, and he had a devotional resume. Well, we checked into it. We checked on some FBI records or different ways to do check.
Okay.
And turned out he had some questionable history. And so we just met, and it related to some transgressions with children. We needed to dig deep in the screening. If we didn't do the screening, he'd be like teaching kids how to swim.
Okay, not such a good position for someone with such a background.
Screening, parental involvement, education for everyone, including the children. And there's different educational programs, including in the devotional communities. Mother Leela Sukha in North America, she's developed nice educational programs. So for the children, for the parents, for the teachers, for the administrators, consciousness raising, and then some basic structures. Of course, if you get into the exact definition, Gurukul is really the school of the guru. So it's like representing Prabhupada.
Right.
If it gets into a boarding school overnight, then there's higher risk. In general, largely ISKCON, they haven't done well with boarding schools, and there's just been repeated gross negligence in the boarding schools. There's still some ISKCON boarding schools in India that have me worried. Okay. Basic things like there's the rule of threes, rule of three.
Always staying in a group.
Yeah, meaning you're not going to have an adult and the child alone. Right. Okay.
And that's even according to the Shastra.
Yeah. That's Shastra. Okay. So you have at least three there. So then it's less about, and then managing things so that the teachers, the administrators, whether it's teachers about sadachar or teachers in language and mathematics or whatever, or if it is a boarding school, then the teachers, they're not overstressed, and they're screened and they're highly trained, and so education, awareness raising, creating a culture where children and teens and everyone feel safe to reveal their heart confidentially. And there's different ways to create that culture and different ways to impede that culture.
Okay.
The whole thing of the unquestionable guru, then you can't say anything, but like that.
Right.
that gets problematic.
Thank Krishna, that fundamental principle, at least for now, is quite clear in our society.
In bliss. Yeah, I appreciate that.
We appreciate it also. Thank you for this input. I think that obviously, as you mentioned, there's lots of detail within all these topics to be covered, and come the time we need to establish a gurukul, we're going to come to you for more elaboration on these points. But just for some clarity on this topic, for those who are not aware, I think this was really an enlightening talk, and thank you so much for giving your time and energy for doing that, and we very much appreciate your experience and insights that you gave now. So thank you so much, Prabhu. And is there any notes that you'd like to give, or any final points you'd like to wrap up the podcast with, on a positive note or an instructive point?
I feel complete. Thank you, Maitreya Rishi Prabhu. I appreciate the enthusiasm of the Bliss devotees, and the dedication to follow Prabhupada as he is, and his teachings as it is. And I certainly, because there's so many expansions of the movement, I feel Bliss really has Prabhupada's Siddhanta at heart, with a grasp of the nuances of what that means. So I hope that with Prabhupada's grace, you do continue to expand, and that will mean children and schooling and education, and I'm glad to support and serve if I could be of service.
Jai, thank you so much, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Feel blessed.
Jai.